this idea of long live the king, it also takes me back to like fairy tales. Did you ever read any of those, or have your parents read you fairy tales as a kid and tell you stories about kings and queens and princes and princesses? Well, I thought if it'd be okay with you this morning, we'd kind of all go back to our childhood and just take a moment to listen to a story this morning. So I actually brought a storybook with me. It's from the Brothers Grimm. Have you ever read anything from them? I love the name of this story too, because it's about a king with a beard. And I mean, come on. I mean, you gotta love a dude with a beard, right? This is the tale of King Grizzlybeard. And as you hear this story, I want you to just be asking a question. What's the moral of this story? A great king of a land far away in the east had a daughter who was very beautiful, but so proud and haughty and conceited that none of the princes who came to ask for her in marriage was good enough for her, and she only made sport of them. Once upon a time, the king held a great feast and asked all her suitors to gather. So the princess came in and said something very spiteful to each of the suitors. The first was too fat, so she said, "He's as round as a tub." The next was too tall. "What a maypole," said she. The next was too short. "What a dumpling," she said. The fourth was too pale, and she called him Wallface. You ever been called Wallface before? The fifth was too red, so she called him Coxcomb. The sixth was not straight enough, so she said he was like a green stick that had been laid to dry over a baker's oven. And thus she had some joke to crack upon every one of her suitors, but she laughed more at one of them than all. A good king who was there. "Look at him," she said. "His beard is like an old mop. He shall be called Grizzlybeard." So the king got the nickname of Grizzlybeard. But the old king, the princess's father, was very angry when he saw how his daughter behaved and how she ill-treated all his guests, and he vowed that willing or unwilling, she would marry the first man, be prince or beggar, that came through that door. So 2 days after, there came a traveling fiddler who began to play under the window and beg alms. And when the king heard him, he said, "Let him come in." So they brought in a dirty-looking fellow, and when he had sung before the king and the princess, he begged a boon. Then the king said, "You have sung so well that I will give you my daughter for your wife." The princess begged and prayed, but the king said, "I have sworn to give you to the first comer, and I will keep my word." So words and tears were of no avail. The parson was sent for, and she was married to the fiddler. When this was over, the king said, "Now get ready to go. You must not stay here. You must travel on with your husband." Then the fiddler went his way and took her with him, and they soon came to a great forest. "Pray," she said. You ever start a sentence with pray? "Pray, whose is this forest?" "Why, it belongs to King Grizzlybeard," answered he. "Hadst thou taken him, all had been thine." "Ah, unlucky wretch that I am," she sighed. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Next, they came to some fine meadows. "Whose are these beautiful green meadows?" she said. "They belong to King Grizzlybeard. Hadst thou taken him, they had been all thine." "Ah, unlucky wretched that I am," she said. "Would that I had married King Grizzlybeard." Then they came to a great city. "Whose is this noble city?" she said. "It belongs to," can you guess who? "King Grizzlybeard." "Ah, what a wretch I am," she sighed. "Why did I not marry King Grizzlybeard?" The fiddler said, "That is no business of mine. Why should you wish for another husband? Am I not good enough for you?" At last they came to a small cottage. "What a paltry place," she said. "To whom does that little dirty hole belong to?" Guess who? Then the fiddler said, "That is your house and my house, where we are to live." "Well, where are your servants?" she cried. "What do you want? What do we want with servants?" he said. "You must do for yourself whatever is to be done. Now make the fire and put on water and cook my supper, for I am very tired." But the princess knew nothing of making fires and cooking, and the fiddler was forced to help her. Now, in the interest of time, I'm going to kind of summarize the next little part. After they discover that the princess can't cook, they try to find a way to help bring some income into the family. So the fiddler suggests, how about you start trying to weave baskets? But as she starts to weave baskets, her gentle fingers get cut by the willow branches, and she can't do that. Next, the fiddler suggests, why don't you try spinning and gather us an income that way? But she can't do that. She has no skill in that way. Finally, the fiddler suggests that she should set up a stand in the middle of the marketplace in the center of the town and sell pots and pans. And so she goes and does that and tries to, but very foolishly, she places all these pots and pans right on the corner where there's busy traffic. And this drunken soldier comes through on his horse and crashes into the stand, and all of their pots and pans that they've been making are broken into little bits. And don't you know, the fiddler comes and says, I see you are not fit for this sort of work. So I've been to the king's palace and asked if they did not want a kitchen maid, and they said they will take you, and there you will have plenty to eat. Thus the princess became a kitchen maid and helped the cook do all the dirtiest work. But she was allowed to carry home some of the meat that was left, and on this they lived. She had not been there long before she heard that the king's eldest son was passing by, going to be married. And she went to one of the windows and looked out. Everything was ready, and all the pomp and brightness of the court was there. Then she bitterly grieved for the pride and folly which had brought her so low. And the servants gave her some of the rich meats, which she put into her basket to take home. All of a sudden, as she was going out, in came the king's son in golden clothes. And when he saw a beautiful woman at the door, he took her by the hand and said she should be his partner in the dance. But she trembled for fear, for she saw that it was King Grizzlybeard, who was making sport of her. However, he kept fast hold and led her in. And the cover of the basket came off so that all the meats in it fell about. Then everybody laughed and jeered at her, and she was so abashed that she wished herself 1,000 feet deep in the earth. She sprang to the door to run away, but on the steps, King Grizzlybeard overtook her and brought her back and said, Fear me not. I am the fiddler who has lived with you in the hut. I brought you there because I really loved you. I am also the soldier that overset your stall of pots and pans. But now all of that is over. You have learned wisdom, and it is time to hold our marriage feast. Then the chamberlains came and brought her the most beautiful robes, and her father and her whole court were there already and welcomed her home on her marriage. Joy was in every face and every heart. The feast was grand. They danced and sang. All were merry, and I only wish that you and I had been part of the party. The end. So let me ask you this. What's the moral of that story? As I think about the moral of that story, as I attach myself to the different figures of that story, I quickly start to associate myself with the princess. Now, I don't want to stand up here and say you can all call me a little princess or anything. Okay, so you can just erase that from your mind. But what I see in that story is somebody who has so many of these moments where, oh, if only I would have done something differently. If only I would have been a better person. If only I would have treated King Grizzlybeard with more respect. If only, if only, if only. And yet, when that becomes the moral of the story, what you lose sight of is the heart of the king. Because in the heart of King Grizzlybeard is this love for this princess that he pursues her and goes after her even after she calls him names and despises him and ridicules him and makes him look like a fool in front of people everywhere. He still pursues her. See, what's so interesting about that is so many times we read the Bible in the same way, where it only becomes a set of rules of, oh, you should have done this, you better have done that, and in the midst of all of that, you lose sight of the heart of the King who is pursuing you relentlessly. The moral of this story and the moral of today and for us as a church is not for us to simply say, you got to be a better person. You never know when you're going to have your opportunity to love somebody or respect somebody. Don't miss out. And if that's all we leave here with today on this Easter morning is this idea that this book is all about how to treat people nicely and be a better Christian, then you lose sight of the heart of the King who relentlessly is pursuing you. Turn with me to John chapter 20 this morning. Grab one of the Bibles on your table. If you don't have a Bible at home, please take this home. We'd love for it to be a gift to you. Don't worry, nobody's going to stop you at the door and accuse you of stealing or anything like that. It's our gift to you. If you want to open up the app on your phone, you can do that as well. John chapter 20. Here's where we see the glorious moment of our King, Jesus. John chapter 20, the first 2 verses, and then we're going to jump to verse 10. John 20. Early on the first day of the week, while it was still dark, Mary Magdalene went to the tomb and saw that the stone had been removed from the entrance. So she came running to Simon Peter and the other disciple, John, the one Jesus loved, and said, "They have taken the Lord out of the tomb, and we don't know where they have put him." Skip down to verse 10. So the disciples went back to their homes, but Mary stood outside the tomb crying. Pause there for just a moment. Here's what's interesting about Mary. Perhaps she was crying, and most likely she was definitely crying in this moment because Jesus had healed her multiple times. Jesus had made the difference in her life. And to see him be tortured and crucified and laid to rest in a tomb, the least that she could expect now is that people would respect him and leave his tomb alone. But I think what's more interesting and perhaps even more meaningful for why she may be crying in this instance here in John chapter 20 is because her, along with all the other disciples and all the other followers of Jesus, had been convinced the whole time that this King, this Son of God, this Jesus is different from every king we've ever known. He's not the same. He's going to bring a difference for us. He's going to make a difference in our own lives. And for him to be dead in a grave means that he's really not that much different than every other king we've ever seen. You see, in their minds would have been playing through this almost historical, chronological order of kings that have been going. And when they think of Jesus, if Jesus is the king, then he's going to be different from all the other ones. They'd even think back to Adam and Eve and think Adam and Eve, they had such a chance to start off the human race with a great first step, but we only get 2 chapters in until they mess it all up. Which is part of why 1 Corinthians is going to be so important for us. It's jacked up. The church is. Everyone is. We've all got this mess, and we look back to Adam and Eve, and it's all their fault. Come on, Adam and Eve. Just like the princess, oh, you should have not eaten that fruit. Come on, you don't need an apple that bad, right? But the moral of the story is not that Adam and Eve, oh, you shouldn't have. The moral of the story is that even in the moment of their sin, God immediately in chapter 3, when he speaks to Adam and Eve, promises that there will be one who comes to crush the head of Satan, Jesus. He doesn't hesitate, but he promises them a way out, that death will not always be victorious. Mary, along with the other disciples, could have thought back to the Israelites when they were in captivity in Israel. And there they saw a king that they don't ever want to have to see again, right? Because when they were in Egypt, this king, this Pharaoh, ruled with an iron fist, made them his slaves. Certainly, we don't want that kind of king. We need a different kind of king. They would have gone even farther and looked back at the book of Judges, which the book of Judges is all about the people of Israel finally in the promised land, but now they see all these other nations around them while they're in the promised land. And they say, we want to be like them, and they have kings. So God, give us a king. We want a king too. Instead of saying, God, you are our king, they say, give us a king. So Saul comes along the way. Well, and soon after Saul comes David, and surely David, he is a king. I mean, because he can conquer anything. In fact, King David is known for his military conquests. I mean, it's not bad when you start off your career with the whole Goliath thing, right? I mean, you're on a good path if that's where you start. And yet even King David didn't quite measure up because he had an affair with Bathsheba, whose husband was fighting on the front lines for David's army. And David, to cover all this up, has Uriah, her husband, purposely killed on the front lines. We need a better king. And after David comes Solomon, all of his wisdom, the wisest man to ever live, the most wealthy man to ever live, and yet he doesn't quite figure it out. And you could go down all these kings, and you could go to Jeroboam or Rehoboam. You could go to Ahab or Jehu or Jehoshaphat. I love that name, right? It sounds like something Sylvester the Cat from Looney Tunes would say, right? Suffer and Succotage or Jehoshaphat, right? I mean, Jehoram and Joash and Ahaz and Jehoiakim and Jehoiakim. I mean, all of these kings and plenty more. Maybe they're going to be the king that finally brings us to where we need to be, that's going to settle everything for us. And you got to believe that Mary Magdalene, along with the disciples, this whole time they've been walking and journeying with Jesus, he's the one that's going to make the difference. He's the king that's different from all those other guys. He's going to be the one to change everything. And here in John chapter 20, Mary is grieving because Jesus, her king, to her, is still dead. Maybe Jesus was a really nice guy. Maybe Jesus lived a pretty perfect life. Maybe he healed people and casted out demons and gave sight to the blind, but what good is a king if all we say after he's dead is long live the king? But here's where everything changes. Keep following along in verse 11 as we read the next handful of verses. As she wept, she bent over to look into the tomb, and she saw two angels in white seated where Jesus' body had been, one at the head and the other at the foot. They asked her, "Woman, why are you crying?" She said, "They have taken my Lord away, and I don't know where they have put him." At this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing there, but she did not realize that it was actually Jesus. And that man, Jesus, said, "Woman, why are you crying? Who is it you are looking for?" Thinking he was the gardener, she said, "Sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have put him, and I will get him." And then Jesus said to her, and it only takes one word for her to immediately recognize the king is alive. And do you know the word that he uses? To call her home to that, to settle her heart. He says, Mary. As if to call his daughter home. Mary, I'm here. She turned toward him and cried out in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said, "Do not hold on to me, for I have not yet returned to the Father. Go instead to my brothers and tell them, I'm returning to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God." So Mary Magdalene went to the disciples with the news, "I have seen the Lord," and she told them that he had said these things to her. This king, Jesus, is different. Because every king that came before and every king that's ever come since, while they may have been able to conquer many things, and while they may have sat on an impressive throne, and while they may have had a crown on their head, and while people may have bowed to them and said, "Long live the king," no king has ever conquered what this king has conquered. No king has overcome death itself. No king has ever been able to give hope of what is yet to come in the midst of what is painful and hurtful and a struggle of life for us. No king has done what Jesus has done, because death itself could not overcome him. He is alive. It's his victory, Jesus' victory for us. And very simply for each and every one of us, you can almost hear it in the way that he says, Mary. He would call you home in the same way today. Instead of calling you to be a part of some religion in a church, even if it meets in a bar on Sundays, I think the Father wants you to hear his calling you home. Mary, come home. While Mia and I were dating, one of the finest moments of my opportunities to impress her, guys, we kind of have to have this thing of like strut our stuff, let her know that we're the real deal, that kind of thing, was in the championship game of a softball league a couple of years ago. Me and I have been dating for a couple of weeks, so I had a lot on the line, you know what I mean? This was not locked down whatsoever. There was a lot of work to be done. So Mia came along to the softball game that night, and we were playing in the championship game. We got to the last inning, and our team was down a couple of runs in the bottom of the last inning. And I'm starting to notice, man, my name is coming up pretty quickly here in the lineup. I might have to bat here in the bottom of the last inning. And my girlfriend is here to watch me. No pressure or anything, but the championship's on the line too, So we scored a couple of runs. We got a runner on first base, and I come up to bat. We're down 1 run, and there's 2 outs. I can't screw this up, right? Or else I'm going to have to go read the book of 1 Corinthians. It'll be all jacked up if I'm not doing something good here. So I'm just thinking, okay, don't screw up. Certainly don't strike out in softball. You'll never hear the end of that. Don't ground out, because that'll be weak and not impressive. If you're going to do anything, I'm going to hit a home run. I'm going to win this thing right now, right here, and my girlfriend is going to see how awesome I am at softball. Don't you know it? 2 outs, bottom of the last inning, runner on first, we're down 1 run, and I cracked a home run over the left field wall to win the championship of the league. It was probably the best moment of my extensive sports career, It goes all the way back to T-ball, you guys. There were a lot of highlights when, we were doing coach pitch and those kinds of things. And my girlfriend got to see this. Now, here's the other side of the story. I've played a lot of softball since then. And you guys, if I had to come home with her expecting me to have hit a home run in the game that night, there would be a lot of nights where she would just not let me in because I didn't hit the home run. If it was all about impressing her and coming home and expecting her to let me in because I did something impressive, you guys, there have been plenty, and Brent and Adam can really attest to the fact there are plenty of games now in softball where I do very unimpressive things, terrible things for our team that would not be good. Thank goodness she's tied the knot and everything and really committed to me, because who knows, if I had to impress her now, it may not go so well. If it relied on me to impress her every time that I came home at night from softball, and she's standing at the door and she said, did you hit a home run tonight? Sorry, babe, I struck out 9 times in 6 at-bats. Some of you are doing the math. That's a really bad night, right? And she didn't let me in. Yes, that would be bad. Because maybe along the way I've had one or two impressive nights. Maybe I've had some clutch hits. Maybe I've played well a few times here and there. But oftentimes it works out where I'm not quite up to par. Same thing goes for how the Father loves you. If you're anything like me, there's a lot of days where you're not quite up to par. There's a lot of days where what you do every day and how you live your life, man, if you had to come home impressing God, or if you had to come to church on Sunday morning saying, God, here's how I think I should have impressed you this week. God wouldn't even open the door. But thankfully, his victory is our victory. And what we celebrate today is that for our least impressive moments, for all the times that we are jacked up, for all the times that we come home or we come to church on Sunday morning with an unimpressive track record, we have a king who's not standing there as if to be the bouncer to church saying, what have you done for me lately? But we have a king who relentlessly pursues us in spite of our sin, in spite of our brokenness, in spite of our inability to impress him. And thank God that his victory, the way he overcame all sin, death, and destruction, is now our victory. And all he's calling you to today is to simply come home. Mary, it is I. I am the king, different from all other kings. I mean, instead of riding a stallion down the streets, he rode a donkey. Instead of having people wash his feet, he spent time hours before he went to the cross washing his disciples' feet. Instead of some kind of military conquest, we have a king who overcame death, sin, the devil, so that today his victory would be your victory. So I simply want to leave you with this very bad math equation. 1 times 4 equals 1. See, in just a moment, we're going to collect our offering, and everything that we give today, every dollar that we give is going to be 4 meals for one child. $1, 4 meals for one child in Haiti. But the reason why we do that is not just because we want to be generous and not just because it's a nice thing to do, because I truly believe while Scripture talks a lot about and gives us wisdom for how we can live our lives, the moral of the story is not, you better give more. You better be a better person. But instead you see the relentless pursuit of the king after you, his loved one, his son, his daughter. And so instead of 1 times 4 equals 1, I want you to hear 1, 4, 1. And here's the beauty of the gospel. His one life for your one life. The great exchange that Jesus paid on the cross was his life for your life. So that today, 1 for 1 wouldn't just be about what we give on Sunday morning and putting the offering basket, but 1 for 1 would be the exchange of his life for yours, that you would have hope of heaven for all of eternity. Because that is life. That is eternity with the King. His invitation to come home, used in kingly language from Hebrews chapter 4, is this: listen for the throne of the King. Let us hold firmly to the faith we profess. For we do not have a high priest who is unable to sympathize with our weaknesses, but we have one who has been tempted in every way just as we are, yet was without sin. Let us then approach, or let us then come home to the throne of grace, not the throne of judgment, the throne of the King who gives grace. Let us approach the throne of grace with confidence so that we may receive mercy and find grace to help us in our time of need. This morning, I simply invite you, come home to the King who lives forever, Jesus. Let's pray.